40 years ago, when I was working my way through the University of Saskatchewan, I worked at the diesel locomotive shop for Canadian National Railway in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. One of my jobs during the cold winters, minus 30, minus 40, was called engine watchman. And I would have to go out and make sure that the diesel locomotives were running, they had fuel, they had oil, and so on. And it was a dirty, dirty job because some of the diesel would escape through the stacks, through the exhaust, and rain down on my head. And I always ended the shift, smelling horribly like diesel fuel. And so I remember thinking to myself, maybe someday someone will invent a cleaner fuel for these things. And I'm going to be talking to the man who is in the process of doing that. So welcome to the interview, Gordon Lovegrove.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, you're an associate professor with the UBC Okanogan, and you're working with the Southern Railway of BC on a hydrogen locomotive technology. Can you tell me about that?
Absolutely. We were approached by Southern Railway BC for many of the reasons you cited in that story you just told. They are running currently diesel yard switchers in a rail yard that has to be right in the middle of an urban area, and they get a lot of complaints from their neighbors about the noise, about emissions and vibrations, and the smell of the rail yard operations. And so they approached us to see, they had heard about this weird guy up at UBC in Kelowna doing some work on something called zero emission hydrel. First of all, what is hydrel? It's a contraction of the words hydrogen fuel cell battery electric hybrid rail power. So we just call it hydrel, not hydro rail, but hydrail. And that really uses local made in BC technology and hydrogen, which also is made in BC, but it also can be made across BC in a number of different ways. And the beauty of it is it creates zero emissions. When you think about hydrogen, it's the most abundant element in the universe. It's water, right? H2O, two hydrogen atoms, one oxygen atom. And so in its most stable form, you see it in water. So anywhere you have water, another of the most abundant compounds on the planet Earth, you have hydrogen. And it's about splitting that compound into its constituent elements. And then when you recombine them, you get electricity, heat, and water vapor. So it's clean exhaust. You can drink out of it, and you can also power these locomotives.
Now, for those folks who don't know, these locomotives have been powered by diesel electric for a long time. So you have a big diesel engine, 16 cylinders, and it turns an alternator or a generator of some kind, creates electricity, and that drives these huge motors that are attached to the drive wheels. So if I understand this correctly, Gord, you now have, instead of a diesel engine, you'd have a fuel cell. Instead of diesel tanks, fuel tanks, you would have hydrogen tanks. And is that essentially the innovation here?
Yeah, and in fact, everything you've mentioned currently sits on shelves and is sold everywhere in the world. Fuel cells made locally by Ballard and many other companies in Canada, but BC is where Ballard is, are sold to China and all over the world. Batteries are around, hydrogen is around. It's all off the shelf. What hasn't been done before is modularizing it and replacing the diesel engine. So you have batteries, hydrogen tanks, fuel cell, inside a cowling of a locomotive. So if you're on the outside looking in, you can't tell whether it's running on hydrogen or diesel.
So I would imagine then that one of the problems is sourcing hydrogen. And I know you mentioned that it's available, but in the kind of quantities that a railway would need, is it available?
Absolutely, and it's a byproduct of industrial processes. Hydrogen sulfide is otherwise known as the stinky gas. If you've got a gas leak in your house, that's what you smell. It's also a byproduct of oil and gas industry. But more importantly, it can be produced by a number of what we call more sustainable, green, renewable technologies, like from wind turbines that get pushed by the wind, runs whether it's light, dark, winter, summer, and produce electricity, hydroelectric dams, solar, which again only generates electricity during the day if it's sunny, right? As well as composting byproducts of our agricultural sector, which is anybody across the Canada. That's the prairies, obviously. So there's many different ways to produce hydrogen. And the thing about it, there hasn't been a great market. So actually, the rail industry is producing part of that market. We also have hydrogen fuel cell buses, so heavy duty vehicle engines on our roads, and freight trucks, not to mention other processes that are going to be looking for hydrogen. Locomotive and rail technology, passenger rail as well as freight rail, just happen to be a really good application of hydrogen. Not only is it safe and safer in many respects than diesel, but it is the ability to store it on board a mobile unit. You can't run a long electric cord to create a locomotive that runs electricity. It has to be on board and stored.
Right. Now, again, for viewers who may not know, you can create green hydrogen using renewable energy and electrolyzers. And the experts that I've interviewed say that right now, green hydrogen is around 3 or 4 times the cost of blue hydrogen, which you make with natural gas. So I'm curious, is it possible that in remote locations where you wouldn't want to ship hydrogen by pipeline necessarily, might not be economic, can you set up small hydrogen the electrolyzers with renewable power and create hydrogen in places like McBride or somewhere out in the remote parts of British Columbia? It's a big province, so if you're shipping stuff around, you're going to have fuel where it stops. So is that possible?
Absolutely. In fact, let's even broaden the horizon and talk about our Arctic North, where 75% of all freight to there, remember that's seasonal, by sea in the summer, to rail stubs, and then gravel roads otherwise, and ice roads off in the middle of winter. It's not necessarily a year-round access, but 75% of what they ship up there is diesel. It's for energy, but we all know the wind blows up there all the time. So absolutely. So an electrolyzer, you're right, it is 3 to 4 times as energy inefficient as just steam reform or blue hydrogen, as you've talked about from oil and gas. But that's coming down as researchers work to make electrolyzers more efficient. And that's the intent. Right now, $5 to $10 million for a hydrogen gas station. If you're talking about using electrolyzer, current off-the-shelf technology, it's all there. But you could do this and save all those shipping costs by having one up in the north track side, or rail, zero emission rail up there. Again, you'd still need hydrogen supplies, whether it's for heating buildings, electricity, fueling rail. Even you're gonna see hydrogen fuel cell airplanes. So absolutely, it's applicable. And hydrogen, it's stored under pressure and it's really cold. There's no loss in energy potential. In fact, it helps the hydrogen. So it's not like batteries, where batteries sitting around the cold go dead. We've all been there with our dead car battery in the winter, right? This is not the case with hydrogen.
How close are you to having, and I should point out that this is called the Green Goat, which is it's a great name for it. And I assume that the locomotive is painted green. So how soon until you have this pilot project up and running?
Okay, short answer, before 2 years from today. There's a longer version of this answer, if you'll forgive me. Let me start off with the name. The Green Goat's actually a 30-year-old, and right now it's rusty paint. Like I said, over 30 years. It was originally built with batteries of old technology, and at the front end of it was a small diesel engine just to help keep the batteries charged. We're taking that diesel engine out, we're putting in modern technology, modern generation batteries, and we're using a fuel cell to keep the batteries recharged. And so we're transforming the name from Green Goat to Hydrail Goat. And it's in honor of goat because switchers typically bunt, shunt, and push rail cars around in these rail yards to switch from track to track, which is, goats like to butt their heads. So that's one of the reasons. The other way you look at goat as greatest of all time, we talk about Tom Brady and football and things like that. So the way I see it, Hydrail Goat honors the past and looks forward to the future. And absolutely, it's going to be next generation technology.
Well, Gordon, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
You are so welcome, sir.